As an application gets larger, you might find yourself creating many files, and you might want another way of organizing them. Visual Basic provides an architecture known as namespaces. When you create a class, you can place it into its own namespace, and you can have multiple classes in the same namespace. This way, if you have classes where there are naming collisions, that is, two or more classes that share the same name, you can distinguish them from each other by putting them in different namespaces. To add a namespace to a class, wrap the class declaration in a namespace declaration. I'm working in the namespaces solution in a version of my simple calc project. I'll place the cursor at the top of the code and make some space. Then type in namespace. You can add any identifier for the namespace. I'll call my namespace utilities. When I press enter, Visual Studio adds the end namespace clause. Now, to make my class a part of that namespace, I'll cut and paste all of that code, starting with the class declaration and including everything through the end class. The Calc Utility class is now a member of the Utilities namespace. I'll save those changes and then go back to my main window code. I'll scroll down to the code where I'm trying to call those functions and see that I have some new errors. Each time I refer to Calc Utility, the name of the class, I'm now being told that the class is not declared. That's because when you take a custom class and you put it into a namespace that's different than the calling scope, you have to tell the compiler where the class is. There are a whole bunch of available quick fixes here. I'm going to show you what happens if you try this one. Change Calc Utility to utilities.calcutility. That'll work for this call. I'll select it and then scroll back down and look at the change that Visual Studio made. Now it's calling the class and including the namespace before it. That'll work, but the problem is that I have to do that for every time I call the class. It's overly verbose and can become cumbersome. That fixes this line, but I still have errors on the other 3 lines. So I'm going to fix this in a different way. I'm instead going to import the Calc Utility class into the current class. You do this with the import statement. I'll let Visual Studio do it for me. I'll move the cursor off that line to redisplay the error, then look at my correction options, and this time I'll choose Import CodeRunner.Utilities. That adds this line at the top of the class, imports CodeRunner.Utilities. And in the calls to the classes, all of the errors have gone away. I'll save and run the application, and I'll exercise all of the operations, and see that everything's working fine. Now, you might be thinking, I know where the utilities namespace comes from. That's what I just put into my Calc Utility class right here. But where does CodeRunner come from? Why is it a prefix as a part of this namespace? And the answer is that that's the namespace that was added to this project when it was first created. You can change the root namespace for a project by going to the project properties. I'll go to the project in the Solution Explorer, right-click, and choose Properties. And I see 2 values, the assembly name and the root namespace. The assembly is a physical file that will store all of the code for this project. But a project can have multiple namespaces. The root namespace is the namespace that's assigned for any code file that doesn't have an explicit namespace. I'm going to change the root namespace for this project from CodeRunner to Simple Calc. I'll save that change with Ctrl+S, then go back to the main window VB file and see that Visual Studio has updated my import statement, correcting it to include the new root namespace. This import statement is only good for the current code file. And if you want to use these functions from any other code file, you'll need to add the import statement there as well. Or take that code file and make it a member of the same namespace as Calc Utility. Namespaces are similar to packages in Java, but they differ in an important respect. In Java, a package maps to a physical folder on disk. So if this were Java, I would have a folder called Utilities that was underneath the project root. You can mimic that behavior in Visual Basic simply by moving your files around, and many developers do this, matching up the folder names with their namespaces. I'll go back to my project in the Solution Explorer, right-click, choose Add, and then select New Folder, and I'll call it Utilities. Then I'll click and drag my class file into the new folder. Because Visual Basic doesn't automatically map namespaces to physical folders, that doesn't cause any changes in the code. As long as the compiler knows where the Visual Basic file is, and Visual Studio manages all that for you, the namespaces, classes, and functions will be found. I'll test the application one last time and see that everything is still working just fine. Use namespaces, subfolders of your projects, and classes to organize your code. And then, no matter how large your application becomes, you'll still be able to find your code easily to maintain it.